Under the scorching sun like fire of the eastern desert, the ground begins to tremble slightly. A tremor not from the earth but from the rhythmic footsteps of a colossal military force. From the horizon, obscured by red dust, 15,000 soldiers of the Empire's main legion slowly emerge, stretching like a flood of black steel rolling over the scorching sand dunes. Bright red banners fluttering in the dry wind. Leading is the light-armored scout cavalry. Following immediately is the heavy infantry block, carrying large rectangular shields and sharp javelins. The sole target of this great army is a massive limestone mountain, standing vertical and solitary amidst the vast sea of sand. This is the final stronghold, where 2,000 people of the separatist tribe are holding out. There are no noisy battle trumpets or wild cheering. The march proceeds in terrifying disciplined order, only the sound of metal clashing and brief command shouts of commanders echoing between the cliffs. The Imperial army does not rush to attack. The seasoned generals understand that this mountain is a natural fortress, almost impregnable, with all four sides being sheer cliffs, hundreds of truong high, standing vertical like a giant city wall. Instead of organizing an immediate attack, 15,000 soldiers begin to spread out in a crescent formation, dividing into 8 large camps, completely encircling the mountain's perimeter. The engineer soldiers, with shovels and pickaxes on shoulders, quickly digging trenches, building earth ramparts, and erecting sharp wooden palisades pointing outward. Patrol squads on horseback start running around the mountain base, controlling every gap, ensuring complete severance of all communication between the fortress above and the outside world. Heavy ox carts loaded with provisions, timber, and disassembled parts of siege engines stretching for miles behind, signaling a long-term siege. On the large, flat mountain top, 2,000 defenders stand close to the cliff edge looking down. From this dizzying height, the Imperial army below looks tiny but crowded like a colony of ants building a nest. The sentries on the fortress observe every movement carefully. They clearly see the blinding reflection from tens of thousands of spear tips and helmets under the harsh sun. The atmosphere on the mountain top is thick with tension and suffocation. The men check bowstrings and stockpiles of boulders, while women and the elderly reinforce rainwater cisterns. They understand that the siege below is not just a threat, but a death sentence being executed slowly. When night falls, the cold desert suddenly glows with thousands of campfires from the camps below, forming a ring of fire tightening around the mountain base, imprisoning those above in absolute isolation. When the first rays of the new day just touch the top of the highest watchtower, the stifling silence of the desert is torn apart by the deep sound of horns signaling the attack. The generals of the Empire, not used to passive waiting, decide to launch the first probe waves to test the opponent's defensive capabilities. 3 light shock squads, equipped with round shields and ropes, are ordered to advance. They do not follow the usual square formation but spread out, clinging to jagged rock ledges and steep trails narrow as threads hanging on the mountainside. Their goal is to approach the main gate, hanging precariously in the east, and search for weak points on the western cliff. From a height of over 1,000 meters, the defenders observe every smallest movement of the enemy. They are in no hurry to counterattack. Only when the first groups of Imperial soldiers climb to the middle of the cliff, panting heavily and clinging tightly to the rock to keep balance, the command is finally given. Instead of precious arrows, the defenders use the most terrifying weapon of this terrain, boulders. Large boulders as big as a person's embrace, stockpiled along the rampart edge, are pushed down simultaneously. Gravitational acceleration turns the inanimate rock blocks into terrible destructive projectiles. A roaring sound echoes like thunder as rocks hit the cliff face, bouncing off and crashing straight into the climbing formation below. No shield or armor can withstand the impact force from that height. The leading soldiers are crushed instantly or thrown off their holds, falling freely into the deep abyss. Screams of panic mixed with the sound of rock slides create a chaotic and horrifying symphony. At the same time, in more favorable positions, expert archers on the mountaintop begin to fire. The height advantage helps their shooting range be twice as far as normal. The arrows plunge down at dizzying speed, piercing through wooden shields and embedding firmly into shoulders and thighs of those trying to find cover behind rock niches. At the foot of the mountain, the Imperial support archer unit tries to return fire to cover their retreating comrades. Thousands of arrows are launched up, forming a pitch-black cloud, but most fall helplessly before reaching the rampart edge, or hit the bare cliff face. The geographical distance is too great. Efforts to climb with grappling hook rope ladders on the southern flank are also quickly extinguished. when the defenders cut the ropes, causing dozens of elite soldiers to fall onto the hard rock below. After 2 hours of bloody fighting without touching even a finger to the city gate, the retreat gong sounds from the main camp. The surviving Imperial soldiers support each other, retreating in tatters, leaving hundreds of bodies scattered at the foot of the cliff and hanging suspended on rock outcrops. The ground at the foot of the fortress is stained dark red. The probe attack has failed completely, proving a cruel truth. A frontal attack on this fortress in the clouds is an act of suicide. The disastrous failure of the frontal attack did not shake the will of the Imperial army, but on the contrary, turned them into a siege machine, cold and ruthless many times over. The generals realized that the blood and bones of soldiers were meaningless before that vertical cliff. A new military order was issued, completely changing the battlefield situation. Swords and spears were temporarily lowered, replaced by pickaxes, shovels, and sledgehammers. 15,000 soldiers shed heavy armor, embarking on a great construction to strangle life on the mountaintop, building a massive siege wall running all the way around the mountain base area. Under the baking sun making the air vibrate in waves, the gravel plain turns into a giant construction site full of dust and sweat. Thousands of soldiers split into small teams, quarrying stone on the spot and cutting down low bushes to reinforce the foundation. A system of trenches 2 meters wide and deep is dug around the camp perimeter to prevent any surprise raids from outside or breakout attempts from inside. Right behind the trench is the stone wall, rising day by day, built with the Empire's famous technique: solid, straight, and smooth. Meanwhile, from the towering height, 2,000 defenders can only watch the siege ring closing in completely helpless. Their furthest arrows only fall a few dozen steps from the construction site, unable to harm the builders diligently working. They witness the enemy creating their own prison. Every stone placed down there is a day of hope stripped away up here. The atmosphere on the mountaintop becomes somber. Warriors grip the cliff wall tightly, eyes bloodshot, realizing the opponent's cruel intent: starvation and total isolation. In just a short time, the siege wall over 4 miles long was completed, over 6 meters high, thick enough for 2 soldiers to patrol side by side on top. Along that wall are a dozen towering watchtowers, where sentries stand guard day and night, observing every movement. Any lizard running across the white sand between the mountain foot and the siege wall is detected. The siege has now become an unbreakable iron pincer. Not a grain of rice, not a drop of water, and not a piece of news can pass through. The Empire does not need to attack anymore. They sit down behind the solid stone wall, starting the most brutal war of attrition. Field kitchens cook with red fires right before the eyes of those imprisoned above. The smell of food flies up with the wind, teasing the stomachs of those starting to count every grain of dry rations. The war is now no longer the sound of swords and spears, but the terrifying silence of time, where death comes slowly with hunger and despair. Time passes in the stalemate of the siege, but the Imperial generals do not accept just sitting and waiting for the enemy to starve. After carefully surveying the treacherous terrain, they notice the western slope of the mountain, although still steep and dangerous, has a natural rock ledge protruding lower than the other sides. A crazy and unprecedentedly great plan is approved. If they cannot climb the cliff, they will build a massive earthen ramp to walk up it. The order is transmitted like a whirlwind, turning the entire western camp into a giant construction site, where human strength challenges the grandeur of nature. Tens of thousands of soldiers and laborers are mobilized for transporting materials. Since local soil and rock are insufficient, they have to mine from hills miles away, transporting back by thousands of ox cart trips and back-carried baskets. The goal is to fill the deep abyssal gorge, separating the mountainside and the fortress base. The first baskets of earth poured into the abyss are like salt dropped in the ocean, but with the perseverance of thousands of people working restlessly day and night, a solid foundation begins to form from the bottom of the abyss. Large tree trunks cut from distant forests are driven down as piles, keeping soil and rock from sliding, creating the skeleton for the road of death gradually springing up. On the fortress top, the defenders realize this fatal danger. They concentrate their entire force to the west, pouring down a rain of bricks, stones, and arrows on the heads of those constructing below. Large boulders weighing hundreds of pounds hurtle down from dizzying heights, crashing into the cliff face, shattering into 1,000 sharp fragments, or falling on the working formation, crushing anyone who does not dodge in time. Red dust rises thickly after each rock slide, obscuring vision and making the air stifling and hard to breathe. To deal with the fierce resistance from above, the Imperial army deploys large-scale protective measures. Large shields woven from wicker and covered with fresh animal hide are erected in long lines, shielding the soldier groups who are digging and filling. Especially, they build wagons with roofs of thick oak, reinforced with iron plates, moving slowly according to the progress of the earthen road. Under the protection of this hard shell, engineer teams still work quietly, leveling the ground and compacting each layer of gravel. Despite the terrifying crashing sound of boulders bouncing on the roof, the war is now a race between construction speed and destructive power. Each meter of earth rising is exchanged for the blood of dozens of Imperial soldiers, but the road still relentlessly moves forward. It is like a giant earthen sword, slowly reaching up, gradually filling the gap between sky and earth. From a height of 300 meters, the distance gradually narrows. The soldiers on the mountain top begin to clearly see the mud-stained faces of the enemy. Fear creeps into the minds of the defenders when they realize that the natural cliff, the eternal wall they trusted, is being leveled by humans day by day. To deal with the ceaseless rain of stones and arrows from above, the Imperial generals decide to deploy the heaviest weapons that they had painstakingly transported across the desert. On the compacted earth foundation of the ramp and at high points around the mountain base, dozens of giant war machines begin to be assembled. The dark, polished oak frames, massive like the skeletons of beasts, are erected firmly. Military engineers tighten ropes woven from animal sinew and women's hair, twisting to the maximum limit, accumulating a deadly energy ready to explode. When the horn sound ordering fire rings out, simultaneously, 50 long-range catapults roar with terrifying groans. When the throwing arm strikes hard against the stop frame, round ground stone blocks, weighing hundreds of pounds, tearing the wind flying into the air, drawing deadly curves across the deep abyss. For the first time in the history of the siege, the attack comes not only from top down, but destroying inversely from bottom up. The boulders smash hard into the fragile limestone walls on the mountaintop, creating tremors shaking the whole ground. Stone fragments shooting out like a rain shower, tearing the flesh of anyone standing nearby. More dangerous are the heavy ballista batteries placed on mobile wooden towers. These precise mechanical machines launch arrows as long as spears, with shooting force strong enough to pierce two thick shield layers or embed deep into oak pillars. The gunners controlling the machine aim meticulously at arrow slits and rampart edges, where defenders often stick out to throw stones. The wind-tearing hiss of the giant arrows becomes a permanent obsession. Any shadow rising above the wall immediately receives a spear piercing the chest, thrown back inside the fortress courtyard. Under this overwhelming fire support, the terrain advantage of the defenders is significantly nullified. The wooden watchtowers protruding over the abyss, formerly the most favorable stone-throwing positions, turn by turn become targets of catapults. Dry sounds of snapping wood echo, followed by the collapse of the watchtowers, dragging warriors hiding inside down into the abyss with the debris. White dust from broken limestone and red dust from earth fill blend together, covering the battlefield in an opaque mist. Pressured by the rain of stone bullets from below, the defenders are forced to retreat deep inside, abandoning outpost positions at the cliff edge. Seizing that precious opportunity, the Imperial construction army below accelerates progress to a frenzied level. No longer hindered by free-falling boulders, the earthen road just stretches out, rising higher, silent and sure like a giant earthen python slithering up to swallow the mountain peak. The distance between life and death is now calculated by only a few hundred arm spans. When night covers the desert in a cold, pitch-black darkness, the defenders on the mountaintop understand that their time is running out with every meter of earth added. Not accepting to sit and wait for death, a desperate decision is made. 200 strongest warriors, carrying oil-soaked torches, battle axes, and ceramic pots containing flammable pine resin, silently gather at the western cliff edge. They climb down using rough hemp ropes, swinging across vertical cliffs in the thick darkness, heading straight for the temporarily resting Imperial construction site. The raid begins with the harsh, shattering sound of hundreds of ceramic pots thrown hard against wooden scaffolds and shielding wagons on the earthen road. Immediately after, a series of torches are thrown down, turning the ramp surface into a chaotic sea of fire. The fire flares up violently, licking oak support pillars and burning the animal hide covering the large shields. In the ghostly flickering firelight, 200 dark shadows rush in to slaughter madly. They wear no armor to move fast, throwing their own bodies into the formation of sleepy Imperial guards, swinging axes to cut the cables of catapults and destroy digging tools. The alarm trumpet sounds, tearing apart the quiet night. The Imperial camp at the mountain foot wakes up like a broken beehive. Thousands of heavy infantry, with iron discipline, quickly grab weapons and form ranks right in the dark. They flood up the ramp like a reverse waterfall, shield against shield, pressing the suicide squad tightly between the cliff and the abyss. The fighting takes place brutally on the narrow strip of land perched in the sky. The sound of metal clashing harshly, screams of those pushed into the abyss, mixed with the crackling of burning wood. The suicide squad fights with the ferocity of those with no way back. They use daggers to stab into gaps in the opponent's armor, even hugging the enemy tightly and then plunging together into the pitch-black abyss below. Blood stains the newly filled earth dark red. However, the disparity in numbers is too great. The flood of Imperial soldiers keeps rising, layer upon layer, extinguishing the fire with sand and human bodies, then coldly driving the remaining attackers to the foot of the cliff. When the grey dawn begins to flicker on the horizon, the sounds of fighting fade and then cease completely. Not a single one of the 200 raiding soldiers returns to the mountain top. Their bodies lie scattered on the slope or shattered at the bottom of the abyss. Although some scaffolds are scorched and a few machines damaged, but the core foundation of the earthen road still stands firm, defiant against time. The Imperial army cleans up the battlefield quickly, throwing obstructing bodies into the abyss and continuing earth-filling work as soon as the sun rises, as if nothing happened last night. The bloody sacrifice only exchanged for a small scratch on the giant's armor. After 3 long years with sweat and blood mixed into the soil, the impossible has become a cruel reality before the eyes of the defenders. The artificial road, built up from millions of baskets of earth and rubble, has now reached equal height with the fortress wall on the mountain peak. It is no longer a precarious trail, but has become a vast avenue, paved with flat, heavy stones, strong enough to bear the load of an entire army moving in formation. The deep abyss that was once an impregnable natural moat is now completely leveled by human strength and the iron patience of the Empire. On that solid road foundation, the Imperial army begins moving their final monster into position, a gigantic siege tower 9 stories high. Its frame is built from the largest ancient trees of the northern forests, but the terrifying thing lies in the outer shell. All 3 sides of the tower are completely clad in thick, wrought iron plates, riveted together by thousands of large rivets, turning it into a mobile steel fortress, impregnable to fire and swords. This machine stands taller than the stone fortress wall, allowing the attackers for the first time to have absolute height advantage. Moving this 100-ton mass of iron and steel up the slope is a feat of mechanics and muscle power. Hundreds of the strongest oxen harnessed to a complex system of ropes, combined with the pushing power of 1,000 muscular soldiers behind. The sound of iron-clad wooden wheels grinding on the stone road emits an ear-piercing screech, echoing throughout the valley like the growl of a giant beast waking up. With every urging drumbeat sounding, the tower inches up a few steps, looming forward towards the target with threatening slowness. On the ramparts, despair engulfs the defenders. They empty their entire remaining arsenal to stop this iron monster. A series of fire arrows are launched, but only bounce feebly off the cold iron armor or extinguish immediately upon touching the smooth surface. Large boulders, the weapon that crushed so many previous attacks, now hitting the tower only create loud clangs and shatter, leaving shallow dents on the armor shell. Nothing can stop its advance. When the siege tower closes in to 50 steps distance, the ironclad windows on the highest floor suddenly burst open. From a position significantly higher than the defenders' heads, Imperial crossbowmen and light catapults begin pouring fire down into the fortress courtyard. The battlefield situation reverses completely. The soldiers on the ramparts have nowhere to hide, shot down right at their fighting positions by arrows plunging from the sky. The shadow of the giant tower slowly crashes down, obscuring the sunlight, signaling the end is coming very close. From the belly of the giant ironclad beast, a new weapon of destruction begins to awaken. Suspended on a system of chains as thick as a person's wrist is a great tree trunk over 15 meters long. The head is completely covered by a block of cast iron, shaped like a ram's head, heavy and cold. Under the control of the rapid drumbeat, 60 muscular soldiers inside the tower together exert all strength to pull the log backward to the point of tension, then release their hands simultaneously. A deafening explosion like thunder in a clear sky rings out when the iron ram head collides head-on with the city wall face. The collision is so strong that the soldiers standing on the wall are knocked down flat. Limestone dust shoots out, blindly obscuring the view. The rocky mountain seems to shudder and move after each blow. Not giving the opponent time to recover, the ram head is pulled back again, accumulating force and delivering the second, third blow with terrifying destructive power. Small cracks begin to appear on the stone surface, then spreading fast like spider webs, running along the fortress wall that stood firm for centuries. On the wall top, chaos covers the defense team. They desperately throw down anything they can find: boulders, boiling oil, even broken weapon pieces. However, all those efforts are hopeless against the thick, iron-clad roof of the siege tower. The machine still works quietly in an emotionless and precise way. The steady boom sounds echo throughout the valley like the knocking of death. Each beat causes the binding mortar to fall apart in pieces. After an hour of enduring the torture of the ramming force, the structure of the western wall section can no longer withstand it. With a long, loud roar, a massive section of stone wall collapses, dragging the unlucky soldiers standing on top along with it. Smoke and dust billow up like a mushroom cloud, obscuring the harsh noon sun. The cheering of the Imperial army echoes from the foot of the slope. They tighten formation, ready to flood over the rubble to slaughter. However, when the dust veil gradually clears, the cheering suddenly dies out. Instead of a vast opening leading inside the fortress, a strange second wall appears before the eyes of the besiegers. Realizing hard stone walls would easily shatter under ramming force, the defenders secretly erected a soft wall layer behind. This wall is structured from large wooden logs arranged in parallel, with packed earth and gravel stuffed tightly in the middle. The ramming machine continues to operate, launching the iron head into the new obstacle. But instead of breaking, the ramming force is completely absorbed by the elasticity of earth and wood. The ram head sinks deep into the soft wall, then is pushed back out, creating no cracks but only making the earth mass even more compacted. Disappointment is clearly visible on the faces of the Imperial commanders. Their most modern siege machine has been neutralized by a primitive but calculated tactic of those driven to a dead end. The battle for survival falls back into a stalemate right at the fortress gateway. Faced with the stalemate of the siege machine confronting the elastic earth and wood wall, the Imperial generals quickly change tactics. Realizing the core material of the new obstacle is dried logs exposed to the desert sun for many years, a cold order is issued. Use fire instead of iron. Thousands of archers and fire throwers are deployed to the front line, replacing the battering ram operation team. A rain of fire arrows and hundreds of pine resin-soaked torches are launched busily, embedding thickly into the surface of the wooden wall. The fire initially only smolders quietly in the gaps, but the strong wind of the highlands quickly turns them into a hungry monster. However, nature seems to want to tease both sides. A sudden wind blows back from the north, blowing thick black smoke and embers back towards the iron-clad siege tower. The temperature inside the tower rises violently, making the iron shell hot like a frying pan. Threatening to burn alive the Imperial soldiers operating the machines inside. Panic begins to bloom in the ranks of the besiegers as they fear their greatest weapon will be destroyed by the very fire they created. But then, as if a cruel fate had been arranged, the wind suddenly changes direction. A stream of hot air from the south rushes in, strong and decisive, blowing the fire back around, crashing straight into the wooden wall of the defenders. Fueled by the wind, the fire flares up violently, licking up the entire final defensive structure. Large logs crack open, popping, sap boiling and bubbling out, flowing like blood. The earthwood wall turns into a giant kiln. The terrible heat radiating out makes the defenders unable to approach to extinguish the fire. Night falls, but the mountain peak shines bright as day with ghostly red firelight. Looking up from the foot of the mountain, the fortress looks like a giant torch hanging in the starry sky. The barrier wall, the last hope of 2,000 people, gradually collapses into piles of glowing red coals. Throwing open the entrance to the fortress center, there is no barrier left separating the Imperial swords and those holding out inside. Realizing victory is firmly within reach, the Imperial generals do not rush to send troops flooding in right in the chaotic darkness. They order to withdraw troops, retreat to camp to rest, and prepare strength for the slaughter at the next dawn. The horn signaling ceasefire sounds, leaving a creepy silence on the mountaintop, only the wind whistling through the burning ruins. The Imperial guards look up at the fading fire, sharpening weapons and smiling, knowing that tomorrow will be the ending day of the siege lasting 3 years. Meanwhile, inside the wall of fire, the fate of the defenders is sealed, cornered between the abyss and the enemy. When the first rays of the new day penetrate the grey smokescreen lingering from the night before, the air on the western mountain slope becomes thick with cold killing intent. 15,000 Imperial soldiers woke up before sunrise, ate their fill, and checked their weapons for the last time. They stand in orderly rows at the foot of the artificial ramp, forming solid black squares, silent as rocks. No longer the noise or bustle of the previous siege days, only the terrifying silence of a storm about to hit. Today, by order of the generals, will be the day ending all resistance. No prisoners, no mercy. A long, sharp horn blast rings out, tearing apart the silence, issuing the general attack order. On top of the scorched siege tower, heavy oak plank bridges are dropped down, slamming into the ash layer of the collapsed wall, creating a shocking thud sound. Immediately, the most elite warriors of the vanguard, equipped with large shields covering the whole body and iron chainmail, scream wild battle cries and flood across the plank bridge. They rush inside the fortress in a posture ready to receive poison arrows or dagger stabs from hidden corners, believing that the defenders will launch a final suicide strike at this gateway. Following the vanguard, the flood of steel begins to rise along the earthen road. Thousands of heavy infantry raise spears high, marching in perfect step. The sound of hobnailed boot soles grinding on the gravel road surface creates a gruesome sound. On both flanks, cavalry units have dismounted, leading war horses, ready to jump into the saddle as soon as they cross the rubble to pursue remnants in the fortress courtyard. Commanders ride back and forth shouting loudly, urging soldiers to hold formation, not to separate to avoid ambush in the narrow alleys of the residential area. The army passes through the smoking ash layer of the wooden wall. Heat from the ground melts leather soles. Charcoal dust flies up, clinging black to murderous faces. They enter with high alert, eyes constantly darting towards remaining watchtowers and distant warehouse roofs. Shields are raised over heads, creating a mobile steel dome shielding the whole formation from any foreign objects from above. Tension rises to the extreme. Every soldier holds breath, waiting for the mad scream of the enemy, waiting for a sword swinging out of the smoke, waiting for the collision of metal and flesh. However, contrary to the burning spirit of the attackers, the space in front of them remains strangely silent. The vanguard has passed the shattered gate area, advancing deep into the courtyard, about 50 steps, without meeting any resistance. There is no rain of arrows, no rolling stones, nor the shadow of 2,000 defensive warriors arranged to fight. Only the sound of wind whistling through gaping doorframes and fire popping from glowing coal piles. This abnormal emptiness makes the commanding generals frown suspiciously. They order soldiers to stop, tighten the circle, fearing this is a large-scale trap the opponent has set to lure the army deep into a noose. The silence covering the vast fortress is heavier and more terrifying than any battle scream. The Imperial vanguard, although mentally prepared for deadly traps or ambushes from corners, still cannot hide their bewilderment when walking in a dead city. Small groups of soldiers split up, using feet to kick open wooden doors, rummaging into every warehouse and barracks with spear points, always pointing forward. But responding to their aggression is only the sound of wind whistling through empty corridors and the crackling of fire from ruins not yet extinguished. Advancing deep into the central area, formerly the old royal palace, commandeered by defenders as command post, Imperial soldiers discover columns of thick black smoke rising from food warehouses. Fire is consuming thousands of wheat sacks, olive oil jars, and shelves containing dry ration reserves. This shatters the general speculation that the defenders had run out of food. The act of burning food is a final message of proud defiance. They did not die of hunger and left no spoils for the victor except ash. Continuing to break the great door of the main hall, the horrifying scene displayed before their eyes makes even the most weather-beaten warriors freeze, hands dropping weapons. On the cold granite floor, hundreds of bodies lie scattered, arranged in neat family groups. Men lie beside their wives and children, hands still gripping weapons not to fight the enemy, but to fulfill a tragic pact. Blood has dried into large, dark pools, emitting a strong metallic smell mixed with acrid smoke, creating a nauseatingly stifling atmosphere. There is no sign of panic or fleeing. The postures of the deceased show they accepted death calmly and proactively. Imperial soldiers walk through corridors, checking each room, but the script is exactly the same: throats cut or fatal stab wounds to the heart. In the inner courtyard area, they find 10 bodies of the last warriors lying with heads touching each other. Beside the last person, a blood-stained sword remains, a sign that he was the only one to take his own life after helping other comrades depart. Imperial soldiers, originally burning with spirit of slaughter and looting, suddenly become lost amidst their own victory. They walk among the corpses with stunned faces, daring not touch anything. No slaves to capture, no gold to loot, and no battle glory to boast about. The resistance of this fortress ended not with shameful surrender, but with an act of absolute and brutal rejection of imperial power. An entire army of 15,000 stands rooted on the windy mountain peak, facing the eternal silence of 2,000 people who chose death over chains. The fire from the food warehouses, with no one left to extinguish it, quickly spreads and swallows all remaining wooden structures in the fortress. The sweltering heat begins to melt bronze objects and cracks the last marble columns. The Imperial army, though standing on the land of the defeated, feels like standing inside a giant crematorium. Not a single slave to chain, not a single prisoner to lead back to the capital for a victory parade. The victory they exchanged for 3 long years, tens of thousands of tons of earth and stone, and the blood and bones of so many soldiers, finally is just holding a handful of ash in the hand. The Imperial generals look around the desolate scene for the last time with heavy eyes. They understand that those lying here have stripped away the conqueror's glory by determining their own fate. A brief retreat order is issued. The infantry soldiers silently turn their heads, lining up to walk down the steep earthen ramp, the engineering wonder they were once proud of, now becoming the only exit from the dead city. No victory trumpets sound, no triumphal songs, only the sound of heavy footsteps pounding on the gravel road surface, and the wind screaming through the cliffs. When the grand army of 15,000 has fully withdrawn to the foot of the mountain, they turn back to look up at the peak one last time. The solid fortress that once challenged the whole world is now just a giant torch, burning brightly amidst the blue sky. A column of thick black smoke curls up high, blending into white clouds, like a great tombstone marking the resting place of 2,000 indomitable people. The shattered stone walls stand bare, printing a dark black shadow on the afternoon sky red as blood. The army begins to strike camp, packing tents and siege engines to return to the north. Wooden wheels roll again on hot sand, leaving behind a barren, desolate land. The desert wind begins to blow hard, sweeping sand and dust to gradually fill the trenches, mass graves, and blurring the traces of the giant earthen ramp. Just after a few moons, nature will swallow every trace of this brutal war, returning eternal silence and solitude to the rocky mountain in the vast desert, where the legend of freedom and proud death will be told forever in stories by the fires of nomadic tribes for thousands of generations.